We are back with Kaia Kater. The new album is Strange Medicine. Let's talk about Verdone and the sort of the title track where you get the phrase strange medicine. Um, I think we've been talking about the fact that you go through a lot of trauma to tell songs sometimes. We've been talking about the maybe not so happy interaction between um, protagonists and someone else in Often as the Autumn. Now I want to bring you to a song that sort of goes against those grains. And when you talk about having to tell these stories of marginalized people and their pain in your music, how does it feel to flip the script on this song and tell the story of a marginalized person kicking ass?
Man, it felt so good. It felt so good. I wrote and rewrote Fedon. I would say that's one of the ones that you know how like sometimes songs come out kind of fully formed and you
Mm.
just kind of edit here and there and you realize that it's been cooking in your brain for a while. Fedon was one where I found out about who this person was. I talked to people, I read books. I really wanted to write a song about it. And so it was, to me, it was like more of a whittler. Like I had this block of wood and I was sort of chipping away to find the best way to tell this story. And also to make it enjoyable for people who didn't know the story at all. And I knew right away that, Fidon's story ended tragically. Like he lost he tried to start a revolution in the late 1700s and to overthrow the English, and he was a black man who wanted to abolish slavery, and he failed in a lot of ways, and his army was killed or tortured or imprisoned, and he was never found, but like the thought is probably most likely that he tried to sail to a nearby island and died at sea. So everything ended badly, like, you know. But I wanted to write something from like the spirit of like maybe what he really understood was that in um 300, 400 years his mission would be accomplished, you know, or that like freedom would be established. It's like this kind of like faith that you lose the battle but not the war, maybe. And I know I'm speaking in you know platitudes, but I knew that that's how I wanted it to end. um and so yeah, I told Joe and I told the orchestrators on the album, Frankie Russo and Dominic Menke, that it had to have kind of this like pulsing warlike energy, and it had to have forward momentum, and it couldn't lose steam. It had to be like something you look to when you're feeling discouraged. Um, and
Why
I
don't,
feel like we achieved that.
why don't you elaborate a little bit on his story, like
Hmm.
the Spark Notes version?
Sure. So Fedon was his full name was Julien Fedon, and he was from originally from Martinique. He was a mixed race uh, black man. So his father was white, I believe, and his mother was black. And so, because of his status as a mixed person, he was born free. We don't know much about his parents, but I think it's maybe safe to assume that maybe his father was a plantation owner. I don't know. He came from some money, and he bought a plantation on the island of Grenada, which at the time was controlled by the British, and this was in like the 1790s. And uh, at the time, the British were trying to drive up economic um, yield, and so they were working enslaved Black people harder than they ever had to drive up exports. And so it was a particularly terrible time to be Black in Grenada. And Faidon bought this plantation under the assumption that he would just continue to keep people enslaved and make money. And he bought the plantation, assembled an army on the plantation of mostly enslaved people, but also free mixed Black people. And they amassed a bunch of weapons. And on the night of, I think, the first week of March in 1795, they basically marched to a bunch of the plantations around, especially the governor's plantation, who was at the time the representation of the king. And they caught the governor, Ninian Home, and they executed him. And they announced that Faidon announced to the British that he would reclaim the island and free all enslaved people, and that this would be a free island. And there's there's intricacies within that. But they managed to keep hold of the island for just over a year. Their fatal flaw was that they couldn't hold on to St. George's, which was the capital of Grenada. And so the British just kept sending more and more troops and naval ships and eventually recaptured St. George's and then went on into the mountains and dismantled the army. His army, and he lost.
Yeah, I without actually wondering why we didn't learn stuff like that in school, I sort of wonder why we didn't learn stuff like that in school.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I know. Well, especially Caribbean history, right? Because it's just seen as the Caribbean, I find is just seen as like kind of like a playground, like these beautiful ocean beaches and, white sand and palm trees. And it's seen as so non-threatening that anytime there's any mobilization in the Caribbean, it's quickly squashed and tamped down. And actually, I forgot to say that Faidon was hugely influenced by the Haitian Revolution, which was happening around the same time. And Haiti is one of those islands where the revolution succeeded. But I will say that they've been punished for that over the years.
Absolutely. I mean, France more or less decided that they were going to be owed reparations for losing their property, which
Mhm.
when they say property, like in the modern era, we would be referring to that as human beings.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
It's
And yeah,
yeah, I mean,
Layla McCalla talks a lot about Haitian history too. I should reference her. She's a great artist.
yeah, it's I mean, it's absolutely amazing to me and not in a good way that a place like Haiti can be suffering the recourse of French actions for we're going on more than 200 years now.
Yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely.
really good on you for mining that history and finding a song that at the very least feels good to listen to and root for the character.
Thanks, Trevor.
Um, let's wrap things back around. You mentioned how you felt as though you had to include such trauma in your music because of those influences you had. I like closing my shows by having the guest pick a song. And usually I sort of come up with the category on the spot based on what we talked about. So I wanted to ask you to choose a song that, one of those songs that convinced you that you had to live your trauma publicly in order to succeed.
A song that's not mine, you mean?
Yes,
Hmm. Can I take a second? Think about it?
absolutely. I have editing powers.
Okay, great. A song that convinced me that I had to.
Yeah, one
Okay.
of those songs you were talking about early on that you got the idea that you had to use trauma to be truly successful.
I wouldn't say, I mean, I think the entirety of Amy Winehouse's Back to Black album, um, I mean, even the song, Back to Black, I think would be one of the things that convinced me that someone who is in a really bad place mentally can still make just like incredible art. And she was someone who was like an incredible singer and also wrote basically all of her songs. And I was like 13 or 14 when she started coming onto the scene, and she just bewitched me. But I also remember listening to Back to Black and going to the grocery store and seeing these like OK Britain People magazine photos that were exploiting her drug addiction, her eating disorder. And those, I would say, if I can think of it, like that album and her physical and mental state are just married in my mind. And I do often think of artists who died really young, like the 27 Club, or people who died basically before, in my mind now, before they could reach their full potential and before they could start like healing. Yeah. And I just think Amy Winehouse was such a brilliant songwriter and musician. And for a long time, I thought it was because she'd been through so much um, like trauma and addiction. But now I wonder if it's despite that, you know, she wrote an incredible album, and we as a society have lost out on more of her music. Um, that yeah, that could have been really brilliant and even better than Back to Black, because I think there's something inherently messed up that she wrote Back to Black and then had to sing it every night. She wrote Rehab and then sang it every night, and it just became this just total circus, absurd circus. And I think society, we carry some of that because we contributed to that. We contributed to making fun of her.
Yeah, I'd really love to see the day treat uh when we treat young female superstars with just a little more respect, but it almost seems like as we learn the lessons of Amy Winehouse and Britney Spears, the same culture is flipping out and Chappelle Roan for saying, she's gonna
Mhm.
have some boundaries and that fame doesn't mean she's lost all self-respect.
Yeah, well, and I actually think there is progress there. Like she feels like she's going through a really very, very difficult time that I can't even begin to imagine, but she's speaking up for herself, which I think is huge. Um, and something that, people like Amy and Brittany and the times that they were at the height of their fame never felt like they could. So, I do think there is progress happening there that, someone like Chapel Roan can say that even if it pisses a lot of people off. But I guess we'll see. Only time will tell whether, you know, someone like Chapel Roan is punished for saying that she deserves to be treated like a human and with respect. So
All right. Well, on that lovely note, Kaia, thanks so much for coming on the show. Well, let's play play Back to Black, and the new album is Strange Medicine. Thanks so much.
thanks for having me on, Trevor.